And now on to the bit that you've all been waiting for. It's time to hear live from Doshi himself. Simon will be posing a selection of your questions to Doshi. Simon.
Doshi, welcome back virtually to 66. It's fabulous to have you here with us. The interview from Ahmedabad, we talked about this. I just want to pick up on one thing before I come back to the questions here. You worked for two very powerful figures who influenced you. But I think the particular take you've talked about there, about life and your architecture being a backdrop, where does that come from? Does that come from your childhood? It's a very personal, very important difference between you and those who inspired you, those gurus. But you've sort of defined quite a different way of thinking, or at least the way we think they thought about architecture. Could you tell us a little bit about that Damascene moment, or is it something came over time?
You know, let's speak now. I can say that my background with the extended family, grandfather and others, I learned one thing. All the elders have something to say, and there is much more meaning, profound meaning, and it is worth reconsidering that. So when I was with Corbusier and when I was with Louis Kahn, for me they were really like the Indian gurus, because they have another experience, different experience, and especially Kahn considered Corbusier as his guru. So it was quite amusing to really think about them and say, suppose you were doing this look, what do you think Kahn would look at it? I would visit with him to the old city of Ahmedabad and I would say, have you seen this look? And then I would say, what do you think about, if Corbusier now is there, what can we do? So what happened over those decades, that I worked with Lou Kahn, we became not only very friends, but I learned from him how he was on the drafting board, changing plans, modifying plans, and working as if, that he was trying to discover something else for him. So the issue that comes up is that every time there is something new, every time there is something which you are not knowing, you will not know, you may not understand. So there is a scope for additions, there is a scope for modifications, there is a scope for invention. And I think everybody should learn to be humble and have an urge to discover, rediscover, and relearn things again. How can we say that this is finite? And the trouble is when we work with the computers, we don't have an eraser to change. We don't have a dialogue. We don't have discussions. So really the machine is controlling us, and whatever is drawn becomes finite. And that is where the trouble is. So I would think that if I have to work again, I would work on a drafting board with the person there, and maybe a computer as a tool, as something to support. But I would really try to do that, because ideas come on that paper which is silent, and your hand is working, your mind is working, your thought is working, your eyes are working. And I think it's very, very important. It is not just a line drawing, it is not just a thought. I think the important thing is more than a thought, more than an idea, there is something called life. And I think every architect, if he wants to really create something for himself, he should pause as if it's a dialogue with that paper and his soul, which is sitting quiet inside his soul, his body. I think that is the way I would think one should work on architecture. It's not just a machine. And that would be perhaps my way of working. I saw Corbusier and Kahn using eraser, using that charcoal and effacing the charcoal, redrawing the line, changing the proportions, and then waiting, observing it, and have a pause. And I think that is the way one has to spend time.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to open it up. You have this global audience. The first question, ironically, is from London, but London is part of a global audience. And it's a very, I think it's that idea about, you've talked about your background, those who've influenced you, but you're a huge influence on many generations of architects. And this question from Matt Thornley in London is quite simple. What would be your one piece of advice for a young architect?
Be open, keep your eyes open, and everywhere that you go, whichever place you travel, whichever place you communicate, find out why the place and the space is the way it is, and what is your reaction to that. Be open-minded. Don't have prejudices that this is wrong, this is right. I think ancient history tells you all the time that things are evolved over a period of time through experience, and nothing becomes really sacred and rigid. And it is all done with the body. I think our human body is very dynamic, very fluid, very sensitive. Don't think, feel. And that's what the essence of learning. Feeling.
That's very, very clear, and I'm sure many beyond the question will take that on board. A question from Japan, from Mint Minato, is really about your experience in Paris and, in a sense, the others, your colleagues. There was probably an international group of architects who were not Le Corbusier and Kahn, but the peers whom you worked with daily. How important was that reaction with the others around you in that 12-foot wide linear studio to your career, beyond?
I think the advantage that I had was that Corbusier, when he was working with me on my table, I was not knowing French. He was knowing broken English. And he knew that he has to teach me like a child. So he would have a yellow tracing paper. The first thing that he would come and he would say, put the tracing paper, pick up a charcoal, and take the charcoal drawing and start drawing it, and then talking about it while he was drawing. And he would say, now this is the section, and this is where the man is standing, and he would draw the figure. And then he would say that now here is a tree, and then he would make a tree. And then he would say, now you see the bird is flying. So he would just show the open space. And then he would come back to the plan and show you what to do. So what Corbusier was doing was actually demonstrating me through charcoal and on the tracing paper, the way he saw the building. And that is how I learned from him. There was no theory that he was talking. He was talking about how to make a space. How do you make a toilet? How do you really move? How do you climb up? How do your visitors come and go? And then he would tell the stories about this, that, oh, now you draw the auditorium, and then he would draw the curve, and he would say, now the man is sitting there, but there's no chair. And then he would put one or two chairs there. So all these things were descriptive. Most important was that he was not drawing, but he was illustrating to me how to look at an event, how to feel the event. And that is where I learned more from Corbusier.
So in a rather lovely way, the great man himself, was teaching you about architecture and life, but also he was speaking to you in English because your French wasn't yet available to you, which is a very nice story of his humanity. Jinraj Joshipura has asked, how do you create places of tranquility and calmness amongst the visual chaos prevalent in India? I think that's a question from India. I'm not quite certain. But yeah, that idea about, we've talked about life taking over, but India can be a cacophony of images, people, noise, nature, the built environment, and yet you create this tranquility, yet you're also accommodating of life. So I think Jinraj wants to understand your design tools.
I think India is not just, a crowd of people. India is also made of people who live in houses and homes, small rooms. And when they live into those small spaces, you learn over time how they learn and adopt to the space and create joy, create celebration, create communication, and create something which can be adaptable to the own lifestyle. I think India is full. In fact, it is not only in India. Everywhere, anybody who wants to do, they should live more with people and see how intimate they can react, how they can modify, how they can evolve, because that is the time you learn about sound, gesture, feelings, proportions, light, shadow, and the kind of communication.
So in a sense, you don't necessarily see it as a chaos, you see a language and a consistency within that culture. There's a question here about, you mentioned Palladio, but Issy from the UK is asking, who is your greatest architectural inspiration? Is it a person, a place, a city?
I think it is the building and the space. I can only talk about Palladio in a sense that I mentioned to you last time, that one day I went to see Palladio and I admired his work. And when I went to that particular building, I did not see anything there very exciting. Very, very simple building, not much work, there's no painting, there's nothing else. And suddenly I went further inside into the other space. And then my eyes traveled to the sky, the roof. And there I saw the heaven painted and all the fairies and the goddesses and whatnot, were in the heaven. And that was the first time I learned that the joy is with your eyes and space, and then the value of that space, because it is not the question of what you see, how you see, but how you relish it. Our eyes are supposed to be sensitive enough to know the sweetness, hardness, the freshness, the fragrance, but we don't think like this. So space is not just a space. The space is connected to the whole body. So I think architects should work with their whole body and not with the machines, not get detached separately, but they must be part and parcel of their living conditions. They must feel it, and they must sense it, and they must get the pressure of right, wrong, tight, soft, hard, etc.
You're someone who's worked around the world. We're today in an international audience, but you've specifically built in your home city and then around India. A question from Judith Perry. Would you agree that too much of the history of modern architecture is imposing style upon place? That's her suggestion. Would you agree with that suggestion? The imposition of modernism.
I think one should not look at those styles. One should just be an architect, a simple one, who wants to do a building which is connected to multi-dimensions with different experiences. And I think he should just start doing that work as if you know that he has no background. I think that baggage of education is a hurdle.
There's a question from Jess Hrivnak in London. It was mentioned that you've been doing net zero. It was mentioned in the films. Could you expand on this element of your design legacy, your thinking about materials and the environment, which I think is not of the moment, but it's of your career, and maybe particular to the way you've pursued practice?
I think net zero comes from one simple thing, that if I was doing a house or if I was doing an office or a factory, I would really talk about convenience, I would talk about light, shadow, temperature, climate, etc. And slowly I would try to put this together. And then there is no question of asking about really, because the traditional house has courtyards, they have terraces, but those terraces are used only in summer, or then there is a monsoon when they use something else. So continuously looking at climate, seasons, changes, activities, I think becomes very important. Function is not one. Function doesn't happen at a specific time. Function is cyclic. Function is round the clock, and the psychology of behavior and activity also goes round the clock. So they have to be fused.
Thank you.
That means your bodily language is part and parcel of design.
The next question, I mean, you have an office, as I said, it's a multi-generational office, and there are a lot of young Indian architects working with you and your team on projects. Ketan Gupta is interested about your view on computers as tools, on artificial intelligence, and the way forward for architectural practice. It's quite a big topic, but it'd be interesting to get your response to how you, as an office, absorb technology, to allow you to do what you want to do, or do you think technology is beginning to drive the way you do things?
At the age of 94, 95, I have no idea about modern technology. But I am an old man with a little acquired intelligence of age and experience. And I think that's how I work.
There's one last question, which is, I think, it's a statement with the question in it. Did you adopt the philosophy of letting the end user change or modify the spaces you have designed, which you've called ownership, from observing the results of Corbusier doing the contrary? So the first question is, do you think Le Corbusier did the contrary? And if so, how did you react to that? Or do you have a different interpretation of Le Corbusier as the engager rather than the imposer? And that question is from Annette.
Well, I can give you one example. When I was working on the Mill Owners Association in Ahmedabad with Corbusier, and there was a situation when the walls where he was thinking about the walls and the window and the light, and suddenly the thought came, and then he says, "Oh, I forgot about toilets are missing there." And then he said that this is not the function here, but maybe somebody else wants to come here and he wants to sit on this side of the place, etc. So what he was doing was looking at the space, the plan and concept on a blank paper, And with the charcoal, he would rub away what he did not like. So there was no question of preconceived ideas or theory or anything. He was creating actually life there through modifications, transformations, readjustments of things, as if it is going to be a space, and it is built like that. So he's like a sculptor. He was molding it.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you again in the virtual format. Thank you. We will end now, but I just want to conclude by saying, the reason we wanted to celebrate your wonderful career is your practice is informed by history and lived experience, the importance of your culture, your idea of it, the eyes and engaging with the world. It's been, your career is about buildings, it's about life, but it's about improving the human condition. It's a study into constructing an idea for a future, a near and long-term future, which you suggest, but you don't prescribe. And what's amazing is that there are 3 generations of your family pursuing this alongside a talented cohort of young people. You've undoubtedly been an inspiration to many of us around the world. So thank you again for joining us. I'm so glad the monsoon didn't cut you off from this global audience. It's been a privilege to talk to you again. And I'd like to end by saying, to everyone inspired by today's event, nominations for our 2023 Royal Gold Medal are now on the RIBA website, architecture.com. We'll now hear some final messages of congratulations. But before then, I'd like to send our thanks to everyone involved today, from everyone behind the scenes, there's quite a big scene in front of me, and to Jack for hosting us today, and of course, to yourself, Balkrishna Doshi, congratulations once again. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you as the 2022 Royal Gold Medalist. Thank you all very much.